Historically, information in the IT industry has been really has been seen as an IT issue. You know, it's the people who do the databases and they do all the managing the data, and it's really been. But now, the way that people are thinking about it is that data itself is being treated or considered as being a strategic asset. And what we mean by being treated as a strategic asset is that people are looking and say, well, actually, what business analysis can I do on that? What business benefits can I gain from the behavior of people and the information that we've managed to gather from them? Yeah. And so it's no longer an IT issue. It starts becoming something which the business itself can handle and utilize to take advantage of. Yeah. And the idea behind that is again that that information can be exploited. But in order to be able to do that, and I'm sure you yourselves have found this, is that when you're handling data and looking at data, if you want to try and exploit it in a particular way, and it's not a sort of separated, isolated island, you need to be able to have some trust in that the information that's provided is, good and it's of value and it's right. Yeah, and so the business, in order to be able to use that, they need to have some confidence that the data that they've got is trustworthy. Yeah. They need to be able to understand its meaning, and I'm sure even if you've tried it, if you're doing trying to define your data, and so what's the definition of a customer? I don't think anybody can actually agree what the definition of a customer is. Everybody's got their own opinion on that, yeah? So to understand its meaning, yeah, and trust that the information that they've got is right, and so that they can actually make some objective evaluations and decision making based on that. And the idea there is really when you are looking to use that, the information, the data that you've got, you're basically looking at making better, faster decisions in there. And then having that information at hand means that you can do your regulatory compliance in there. It means that you can develop new products and services based on real information that you understand. Yeah, provide for a better customer experience. Yeah. As well as the normal sort of thing where you're trying to drive better operational experiences in there. And that's all really come about from the fact that out there, not only is it just your normal things which have been connected to the internet, but now with the Internet of Things, with more and more devices being attached and added onto the internet, there's just more and more data over there. And I'm sure you've heard this before. There are lots of reports out there and statistics out there, and trying to impress people with the volume of data that has been created out there. And the challenge, with all of this data, which is sort of proliferating, as it says in there, sort of exponentially, is that how do you actually get value from that? And there have been some reports or studies that have been conducted, in particular here by Ernst & Young, yeah. And basically what they're finding is that, yeah, it's all very well collecting this information and you're getting more and more and more of it, but the challenge is really, what do you actually do with this? How do you analyze that information and make some useful insights into that, yeah? And as it says on there, out of the reports that they found, is that, something like only 0.5% of all the data is ever analyzed. And that's going to be forever true, in that as more and more information is gathered, yeah, you've got to be able to target the content in there to make it worth your while to sort of work out patterns and correlations and causes of the data that you've got in there, and make some useful insights into that. Yeah. So the challenge there is really being able to make sure that we use the data correctly. And historically, the way that people have looked at the sort of using the data and being pushed to make more use of it has been for things like regulatory compliance. And this is actually a bit of an impetus in that what it's trying to do is to say, well, it's not just an IT issue anymore. It is a business issue about the data that is being held about individuals. And so things like GDPR are actually forcing people to look at the data that they're holding about people and making sure that it's being used for the purposes that they set out. It's not being used for cross purposes, or if it is, then they need to have gained permission at some point in time to be able to do that. So GDPR, in a way, is actually, or any regulatory compliance initiatives are in a way actually a driver to getting the business to think about data, not just as a IT thing, but actually as a business thing. But it does depend upon how the business treats an initiative like GDPR. I was working with one company, and what they've decided to do is, well, they haven't decided to actually use GDPR to understand what the data is and how they're using it properly. They're just going to use it as a form ticking exercise so they can demonstrate to the regulators, yeah, we understand what this data is. Yeah, we understand what this data is. We comply here. We ask the right questions. So if they say, are you compliant? Yes, we're compliant. But as soon as, it's like getting an MOT on your car. As soon as you've done it, you're demonstrated your compliance, the next day you could be out of compliance. The point being is that the people are using GDPR, if you're not using it sensibly as a way to actually manage your information and use it strategically, it can just become a compliance thing. Yeah, I do, fine, forget about it. Yeah, and that's not really where we want to be. This is one of the outcomes that we can have as a driver to help us to make sure that the information that we've got is being used in a strategic way in there. So yeah, it's good, but I think there is more that can actually be done about this. So the thing that we've really got to do, as I say, is to make sure that it's not just an IT issue, that the business does get involved in there. And by making sure that the business is actually involved in there, it raises the visibility and it says, yes, we understand what the data is, we know what the patterns are, we know what correlations there are in there. And to raise the visibility and control it, yeah. And again, with the control, it's a case of defining the data so that we have common understanding of what that data actually means. Yeah. So that we can actually unlock some business value out of that. And what we're looking at there to do is, okay, make sure that we're working smarter and better, increase our revenues in there, demonstrate a compliance and privacy, yeah, get better satisfaction in there, improve the decision making that we have in there. And I say, the data governance has always been seen as a sort of as an issue to, as an avoidance strategy. And what we're looking here to do is to make sure that it's actually an integral part of where the business and the IT are actually coming together, because they're the ones that actually understand everything in there. So what do we actually mean by sort of data governance? Well, there's a number of sort of facets to it. Yeah, there's the governance side itself, which says, okay, who owns the data? How can we define it? What's the life cycle for defining that data in there? What processes are we going to follow? And define and formalize those data definitions, but express those not just in IT data terms, but express those also in a way that the business itself can actually understand that. Yeah, that's the important part within there. Obviously, with the amount of information that we've got, the amount of models and data that we've got, it is quite difficult to do that without the support of having specific tools and techniques to help us to understand that. And so, yeah, having in place some systems and tools to be able to do that is more or less essential in there. Yeah. And having some sort of flows or some sort of approval flows, where somebody says, yeah, this is a piece of data that we think we need, we can suggest it, somebody can review it and approve it and release it, etc. So managing those different versions in there. But also, again, to make sure that the IT, that this is not just solely an IT function, that we've also got the business involved. We need to know who's actually responsible for looking after that data. Yeah, so who's responsible, accountable, consulted, informed. Yeah. So that we can go back and say, well, if it's really important to you, tell us what's important about it, why is it important, where are you using it, yeah, to understand that. And to define also You may have come across these terms, the data stewards, the people who are actually responsible for defining what that data is, working with the business to define what the data is. The data custodians who are responsible for making sure it's stored sensibly somewhere, is available to people. Then you've got your data citizens. That's a broad term really for anybody who has an interest in using the data that we've got in there. So making sure that we've got people who are accountable and responsible for that. And then, of course, we need some sort of processes and controls and standards and policies and procedures in there to make sure that we can manage not only the metadata, but actually managing the data itself as well. Yeah. So that's what we're talking about within there. And earlier on in some of the discussions, I think, that Martin was talking about, we've got this, or Erwin have got a thing called the Enterprise Data Governance Experience, i.e. the EDGE. And what that's really talking about is not just about data governance itself, but the broader context in which the data governance sits. And as part of that, it's talking about the fact that, when we're talking about data, we want to make sure that everybody who needs to access the data can access the data at any point in time. Actually, that reminded me, I don't know, some of you will remember this. I know it's called Any Data Anywhere, but do you remember where it says anytime, any place, anywhere, the martini? Yeah. It's the same sort of thing, yeah? Any data, anywhere, yeah? So making sure the right people have got the information available at hand and being able to use it, yeah? But obviously, the people who are using that, the stakeholders, they need to have the confidence that the data is correct, that the models are correct in there, that they have confidence in being able to use those, yeah? Being able to have the tools and capabilities to be able to go and make decisions based on that in there. And what we're also talking about in here is providing an integrated ecosystem where you're actually sharing the information across with other parties, other people in there. Obviously, again, for regulatory compliance, you're going to be sharing information with external parties. Yeah? So making sure we've got integrated ecosystems. Visibility across the domain. So again, when we're talking about the enterprise data governance experience, if you're defining the data, well, the data doesn't sort of sit in isolation. It's used as part of systems. Yeah. So it's used in a system, on a screen, on a form somewhere. Yeah. So we want to make sure that that data is used across there. If we've got applications, we've got data flows in there, we've got processes. Yeah, here are the business processes. Well, what's the data that they're using? Well, it's this piece of data that it's using, and this is what we're doing on it. Yeah, we're creating it, reading, updating it, deleting it. Yeah, so providing the same data across the visibility means that we're standardizing on the data, using the same data across the different domains, so there's consistency, yeah, less errors within there. And then obviously it's talking about the experience or the capability to provide regulatory compliance within there as well. So what are we actually talking about when we're talking about data governance itself? You might have seen this before, but what we're looking at here is looking at a business glossary. And what the business glossary is talking about is those things which the business, or the information and the data which the business is interested in, but expressed in business terms, yeah? So, I'm a customer, or I'm a client, or this is a purchase order, not, the database specifics or the forms and the fields which are in there. And as part of that, defining what the business term is, yeah? Defining how that business term itself may be used. Are there any standardized code sets? So by standardized code sets, we're talking about there may be international country codes that are being used, or international dialing codes, or you might have your own code sets for internal purposes, which you're defining in there. And against that business glossary, what policies apply, what business rules apply, who owns that? So all of that over there is the business glossary expressed in business terms. But what you've also got over here is what we call the data dictionary. And what the data dictionary is talking about is what are the columns, what are the attributes, what are the fields that we're interested in. Yeah? And there may be forms, or there may be fields in forms, etc. and to sort of harness and harmonize all of these different ways that you can physically describe the data. It was mentioned earlier, there's a thing called a data element, and what the data element is it's just a technique to provide a unified way of expressing the physical data that you can have. Yeah. So it's atomic data in there, and I'll show you an example of how we're actually using that later on there.
The two link together, so the business will link it to the equivalent items in the data dictionary.
Now you're taking my demonstration away from me.
Yeah.
Right. So that's the IT sort of area. That's your business area. Yep. And over here, well, how are we actually using it? Well, we've got, we might have some sort of data flows or process flows which are using the data. Yeah. We might be part of a process flow again in there. We might be interested in who is using what pieces of data in there. If we are doing, say, a data warehouse and we want to understand what the lineage is, or if we're building up reports, what information are we consolidating to provide those particular reports in there. So looking at the lineage. So what this is saying is, well, this is how the actual data itself is actually being used. Yeah. So these are sort of facets that are the primary areas of the bodies of knowledge that we're interested in here. And again, for governance purposes and management purposes, we might want to understand for the data what the audit trails are. Do we have any issues with the data that we've got? Is there a workflow that enables for us to take a business term from something which has been proposed to approved and accepted and so on in there? So we're going to show some of those as part of the demonstration in there. And I think I mentioned this already, that there are different levels of people who are interested in using that information to which it's targeted at. And again, we've got the stewards who are the people who collect the information, working with the business. We've got the consumers, the end users in there, the keepers, i.e. the data custodians, and obviously the C-level officers who are interested in making sure that we handle everything properly. So that's the sort of bit of a background of the idea behind the data governance and also the enterprise data governance experience in there. So what I'm going to do here is there's a number of slides which I'm just going to go through really to introduce the data governance product that Erwin has. And then what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you a short sort of demonstration of the DG itself. Yeah. And in here, what it's again talking about in terms of, and again what Martin had sort of introduced in there, is this thing called the Data Foundation Platform. So that is going to have all the technical capabilities in there. There's a number of shared capabilities in there. We've got the new data governance products in there, yeah, and those shared capabilities are looking to share the data that we define over in the data governance as part of the business process modeling or part of the enterprise architecture, using the data models that we've got in our data modeling capabilities as part of the data governance, and obviously being able to collaborate within there. And so, as it says, a unified data and process modeling architecture and governance all in one software platform. And if you're using that, well, that's the enterprise data governance experience that is in there. So that's what the platform, and that's where the data governance product itself sits in. So if we're looking to use that, well, some of the things that we're interested in doing is, first of all, with our data, is to actually discover it. Yeah. So how are we going to go and discover that? Well, that might involve using reverse data engineering and then lifting that up and saying, well, actually, these tables and these attributes mean or are relevant. Are these actual business terms? Yeah. And that requires some sort of human intervention to be able to interpret those data tables and discover that. You could also build up your business glossaries doing there are, depending on the industries you're involved in, there are some international standards out there. So for example, at the moment, there's one for intellectual properties. Yeah? So there's a standard out there which says this is how you define the various attributes and information that we're interested in. It's called ST96 if anybody's interested, but that then defines what the business glossary is. And so you can actually do it top down, so you could use that and build up your business glossary. The point being is that, you know, you can do it sort of bottom up from understanding what's out there, top down from looking at what is available in terms of standards, and obviously going out there and talking to the business user community as well as the technical communities in there. And what you're building up there is a glossary of terms which can be expressed in the business terms. Then also the reference data will be those things that you might have reversed in to define what your attributes are, what your columns are, what your fields are, etc. in there. Yep. So building that up and discovering that. Yep. Once we have that, then we can start looking at, well, now how does the data get used? What flows are there within there? Defining the actual data dictionary and defining the individual elements. And that's where we're talking about this data element in there. Now, if we've got our business terms, we've got our data dictionaries, well, we can have governance of those, which says, okay, this is the defined set of business terms, this is a defined set of data. You can only use these if you are going to make any variations. Here's the process for submitting your variations or for submitting new ones in there. And what policies and rules apply to the creation of new objects or new glossary terms as well as your existing ones in there. And all of that really does exist so that people can actually use it. Yeah. So what can we use it for? Well, we can go and understand how the data is being collected, how it's been funneled, where it can be used in terms of new projects that you're looking to develop or for enhancements. Yeah. That's the real idea is, yeah, it's not just about discovering, understanding, and governing it, but actually making it available to people so that they can actually go along and use it. Yeah. And another part, I guess, part of the governance in here as well, if they do find some issues where they want to make sure that there's some variations or they want to make new additions and enhancements and so on, is to identify what data issues there are and propose those so that they are subject to a governance process within there. So all of that is talking about having workflows in there, collaborating with others, using shared common services within there. So that's what the Erwin enterprise data governance experience is. Yeah. And so what we're looking at there, again, you know, when we're doing the discovery phase, yeah, where it's talking about discovering, describing your data assets, it says doing it from a business perspective. So creating those business terms, categorizing those, yeah, creating the relationships between those, creating any synonyms or acronyms or any tags that they might have in there. And yeah, creating your code sets and your mapping to business terms in there. At the opposite end, when we're talking about the IT, yeah, we've got the data that we want to define in there. So creating your logical and physical data models, and I said they might have been created from the reversing those in. Yeah, mapping those back to the glossary terms so that we can understand, you know, if we've got a particular business term, what it manifests itself as in terms of the IT. You know, what column is it, what field is it, what form does it relate to in there. And then again, you know, part of the experience is understanding how the data is used as part of the enterprise architecture, as part of your business processes, and mapping those in there as well. So again, you know, we've got the data citizens in there, so we can govern. Well, the part of the governance in here is regulating the data that we've got, looking at who can access the information, what they can do to that. Yeah, defining the governance models in there, looking at the review and approval workflows in there, managing the data policies and rules in there. And again, I've said, talking about the socialization of that. So as an overall picture, taking all of the the things that we were talking about for Edge, yeah, that's what we're looking at, is making sure that we can provide support for using data anywhere in there, where we've got some capabilities or unified capabilities for looking at the business glossary, the data, catalogs, lineage mapping in there, using roles in there, and for those role-based user interfaces, you know, if you're the data custodian or the data steward or a data citizen, you're going to get different views on there. Yeah. And putting it all together so that we can actually have an experience where we can use the information and the assets that we've got to actually gain value from that to create new applications and new systems in there. So what I was just going to do here then is, we've got a few minutes, and I was just going to go through a small demonstration of using this, yeah? Has anybody actually used or come across the Erwin data governance products at the moment? Just one? All right, fine. Okay. So what this is going to do is we're going to, one of the things I was talking about earlier is that in the demonstration there are you know, the different types of users. You've got the custodians and the stewards and the data citizens in there. So I'm going to do a product demonstration, but it's based on some of those roles, yeah? So it's going to be a role-based one. And the idea there is to walk through a scenario where we've got somebody who's trying to achieve something in particular, and this could be a particular flow that you can follow through, rather than me just pointing and clicking at the menus and things in there. Yep. So what we have already sort of introduced in here is, yeah, the different types of roles that people can play in there. You know, the data users are people who use it, owners and stewards and custodians that we've got in there. So for my purposes, what we're going to do is we're going to introduce a few sort of actors or role players within here. Yeah. So as we go through, you'll see in here we've got a person in here who's a general user. She's interested in making sure that she uses the data for a particular purpose in there. We've got Natasha in here. She's the administrator. She is in the governance role, making sure that the custodians and the data stewards are doing their jobs and assigning work to them. Chris here is the data steward, so he's the one who's actually working with the business, creating the business terms in there, what acronyms there are, what data it relates to, and he's more of a sort of working with the subject matter experts to make sure that those the assets they're building are to approved standards. And Mark over here, he's the data custodian. He maintains and develops the data dictionary, i.e. the attributes and the columns and the fields and the forms and the data that is being used as part of the governance exercise in there. And what we're going to do is we're going to follow a small workflow. So I thought I'd show you what the workflow itself is. It's a very simple one, you know, just to explain the fact that you get different views in here according to what type of role that you're fulfilling. Yeah. And as we go through each one of these, we'll go through some of these steps. Sorry, we will go through these steps and we'll show you what each one of these people is doing as they are performing their particular activities. So, you know, as a data user, Amy is just going to be looking at the data and she's got some sort of issue and she identifies a need that she has, yeah? She will identify that. Natasha, as the governance administrator, says, okay, here's an issue. I'm going to get Chris and Mark to go and take a look at that, and so she'll assign them work to do. And the reason we're going to get Natasha involved in this, you'll see dashboards dependent upon the particular role that you're in, and you'll see on that dashboard the work that you've been assigned to do and the progress that you're making overall on your dashboard. And then Chris, he's going to create some of the business terms that Amy has defined, map those to some of the data that Mark has defined in there, and make that available in there. We'll also take a look at Mark and see what he's doing in there. So in the first instance, as I say, we're going to get Amy, and she's going to come along, and I'm going to have to sit here and run through the demo and and do this. Yep. So Amy is going to come along, and she's got a particular standard or set of assets that she's got. And now I've logged out, so let's log back in again. So I'm going to log in here as Amy and show you this. So we've got our data governance application up and running there. And this is live, so if it does go and break, it is live, it's not pre-recorded here. So based on Amy's login, what you're seeing over here is a user interface which has been restricted to the sort of things that she can do. So she can look at the business glossary terms, she can look at the data in there, some governance assets that she's got, any issues that she's raised in there, etc. So let's go and take a look at the business glossary. So we've got a number of glossaries which have been created in here. We've got one for human resources and insurance. We've also got, remember where I was talking about the intellectual property standards that we've got. So there are a number of different glossaries in there. And Amy herself is interested in this one here. So for that particular glossary, there's a whole set of business terms that have been created, yeah. And against each one of these, so if we look at an applicant, yeah, we've got the descriptions for those, an applicant bag, yeah, etc., an abstract. So we've got the descriptions within there, and its status. Yeah, these have been approved. So great. So Amy is interested in finding a thing called person name, because she has a particular need for that. And she does a filter and finds, well, actually, that business term doesn't actually exist. Okay, so she looks at this and says, oh, I realize here that the standard is actually a version 2.1. Yeah, and because she's up to speed with everything, she knows that it actually should be version 2.2. So one of the first things Amy is going to do is she's going to go along and see if there are any issues associated with this. Well, there's no issues at all in there. And so what she's going to do is she's going to raise an issue and say, well, actually, this shouldn't be version 2.1. It should actually be version 2.2. So this is where it's coming back to saying that, this is not a set of activities being performed by the IT people. It's something which is being performed by the business community, who recognize there are issues with the set of data or the glossary of terms that are being created in there. So you're involving the business user community in there. So what she's going to do is she's going to say there is a missing person name definition. Yep. So she's going to save that. So once that's been saved, that'll be associated with this, and there it appears. And that has been stored against that particular glossary within there. So she's raised that as an issue. What she's also now going to do is to say, well, actually, I know there's an issue in here, and what she's going to do is to propose, she's going to propose this as a business term in there. Yep.
Yeah. What if it's in there as individual name? How fuzzy is the search?
Sorry, as an individual name.
Yeah, what if it's called the individual name as a person name?
Oh, yeah, so...
Search the descriptive text as well?
No, it only searches the name field, and you've got wildcard characters which you can use in there. So it's not fuzzy in that respect, but it is supporting wildcard.
It's worthwhile searching the descriptive text as well, either as an option or default.
Yeah.
Especially if you've got thousands of terms and people know them by different things.
Yeah.
What about synonyms? You mentioned that you can have synonyms. Would it search synonyms? Like it might be person, something like you might call it party.
That's a good question. Do you know, can it search through the synonyms? Sorry?
Yeah, you can do that.
Ah. Okay, you can, but... Now you're testing me. Right. Let's just park that to the side. I'll come back to it later, at lunchtime or something. Yeah, yeah. So it can be done. Okay, so Amy has raised this term as a business name term, yeah, and she's proposed it, yeah. So there's not a lot else that Amy can actually do in here. So what we're now going to do is we're going to go over and take a look at what Natasha's going to do in the next step of the workflow in here. And what Natasha's going to do is she's going to distribute that information, or she's going to assign those particular tasks to individuals to perform those, yeah? So again, let's go in here, and the first thing that we want to do is, we're in here as Amy. Let's log out. And this time I want to log back in as Natasha. And now as Natasha, again, let's go into that. Now what you'll see in here is there are other things that Natasha can do as the administrator over and above what Amy could have done. Yeah. And what we're now going to do is go and take a look at my work items. So what Natasha's going to go and see is a dashboard on here, right? And on that dashboard, she can see different issues, business terms, anything which has been sort of generally captured in here. And she notices there's an issues list here, and in that issues list there's this new one here, which is a missing person name definition. Yeah, so that's an issue in there. She can also go in and take a look at the business terms, and she can also see, including my misspelling in there, that we've got person name as a business term. Yeah, and that exists, and that's been proposed within there. So, sorry?
Date raised.
Good question. Then so can we? Yeah. So okay. So there is a audit here which says, yeah, last updated. It's not a.
That's on the actual thing when you click on it.
Yeah, that's right.
I want to see the current ones, as in the ones that just came in.
So it's worth pointing out.
Yeah, okay.
The whole user interface is customised.
Yeah.
So that whole table that you're seeing here.
So I can add fields.
You can add fields, filters. You can have, if you want the last date or.
Okay, cool.
You do anything
The
like
issue
that.
itself carries date and time, person and raise, all that. And it's project that's connected here to the business term, very business term. Flip that around.
Okay, so there's two things that we're going to do. One is we're going to take person name, and in here we've got the roles, and what she's going to do is to say, well, actually, this is, yeah, okay, so we're going to assign this to Chris. So we're going to make sure that he's the one who's responsible for looking after that. And then similarly with the, and actually you'll notice it's removed from there now because it's been assigned to a person to look at. Similarly with the issues, we're going to go in there and take a look at the person name definition, and we're going to assign that also to Chris as well. Yeah, so he can handle this. So the point about doing that part of the demonstration was really to show you that as there is a workflow which is going through, which is based on the status of the different objects that we've got in there. And that as part of the governance process, you can have the administrator go in and assign activities to different people. Yeah. So the stewards or the custodians and so on. And that's what she's doing in it. And obviously she's got a lot of work to do here because there's quite a few data elements which haven't been assigned, lots of business issues and lots of business terms that haven't been assigned in there. So you can guess what we're going to do now. So that was Natasha. Yeah, she's assigned these. And now Chris, he's got to go along and do the work. And we're going to go in and log in as Chris and go and do some work on that which has been assigned to us. So let's log out from here. Log in as Chris. And again, when we go into here, So for Chris, again, he gets to see his work items in there. Yeah. But notice there's a slightly different view that he can see. So with Natasha, it was a list of objects that she had, a list of issues and business terms. Chris sees same sort of information, but instead of it being a list of, it's in a sort of Kanban style view. Yeah. So in here, he can immediately see, there's an issue there called missing person name definition. Yeah. So that's an issue that he's got to address. And the nice thing about this view is that once he's addressed it, can you see here is the status? It says it's unresolved or rejected or resolved. And at a particular point in time, once Chris has finished working with this, he can drag that over there, yeah, and it'll take on the status of resolved and be removed from the list of outstanding issues that he's got to handle. Yeah, so it's a sort of Kanban style view in there. Similarly with the business terms, he should have a list in here of the business terms, and there's the person name with the incorrect spelling in there. And again, we can move it over here and say it's under review or rejected and finally approved. So if I'm working on it, yeah, I can put it onto there and say, yeah, it's under review.
Got a quick question.
Yeah.
Natasha has already allocated work to 2 different people, and one person here is rejecting it. You've got 2 people working on it at the same time, and one rejecting it. Does his rejection get knocked onto the guy at the end?
So I didn't quite understand what you...
Natasha has allocated this missing
Yeah.
piece of work
Yeah.
to 2 people. This is one of the 2 people who potentially rejects the work.
Oh, I see. Right. Okay. So
Happens to the other person working on it.
right. So well. Okay. So if it's same object, it can't. I mean, basically, it's got properties in there. So you've got a property in here which says has steward, yeah, but that can't be assigned to 2 people as a steward. You can only have 1 person. So she can't assign it to. She can assign it in the respect that it can be assigned for them to do different, because they're playing slightly different roles, but they can't be assigned for the same thing to the same person. So she can't assign a person name to Chris as acting as a steward.
No,
Yeah.
if one person rejects it, saying it already exists or whatever,
Yeah.
the reason is, the other person still has some work allocated by the previous person.
Yeah. Yes.
Sets the flag to reject it first.
Yeah.
So we rejected the both.
Yeah, so it would be rejected on the other
Because
one.
the object carrying.
So the first person to find that, it's not an issue.
So effectively, if you looked inside the definition of that business term, you have an attribute in there which would say status.
Yeah.
It's currently under review. It would change to rejected for. It's not 2 different objects. That's one appointment.
Yeah. So, as I say, this is a nice view that it gives you, a sort of Kanban style view where you can actually move through the different stages of the object within there. Yeah. So what Chris is now going to do is, first of all, he is going to, let's just check where we are. So, where are we? Let's go to the business glossary. So he's going to take a look at those items which are in there. And again, so we were talking about person. So he could have come into here. Oh, sorry, I've chosen the wrong glossary. Oh, I know why. It's because I've spelt it wrong, haven't I? No, I spelled it with a PS, didn't I? That's right. Okay, so let's go into that. So I can see that that term as part of this. It's over here. So now, why can't I edit that? It's under review, yeah. Hold on, let's go here. I don't know why. Okay, so I can put in a description, yeah, we can update this within here, yeah. As part of this, obviously there's lots of other information that you can add into here. There is an interesting one which is called security. And you know, if you're looking at showing regulatory compliance with GDPR, etc., you know, is this personally identifiable information? Well, you know, the name is, so we can put that one as being true. There's also, is it critical to any regulation? Yes, it is. So we think it might be relevant to GDPR. And so we can select that and tick that.
Can you get it to do that automatically?
Automatically based on...
This is personal information, then it is covered. You shouldn't have to tell it that.
No, but there were different regulations on there. So there was Sarbanes
There could be
and...
several that you might want to say.
Yeah.
I've ticked one box, therefore it must be linked to several regulations.
If you're asking it to auto-populate, it doesn't do that. But what it is doing is, it's just a field in there.
Different levels
Yeah.
as well.
Yeah.
It might not be personally identifying in its own right, but
Yeah.
in conjunction with other data, it might be a linkage.
So as part of the demonstration, that's what we've done so far. We've gone in there, we've updated the description in there. The next step I want to do is I want to start looking at mapping that to the underlying data that we've got. But notice as part of the flow, what Natasha had also done, she'd asked Mark, who in the background, he's also doing the data mappings. Yeah. So he's doing the data mappings. Do you remember the data element thing I was talking about, which was the atomic data, the generic piece of data which maps to the fields and the attributes and the columns and so on. So that's what Mark is doing. So he's doing that in the background, and Chris is going to make use of what Mark has already done. And I'm just going to show you that as part of the demonstration here, which says, so as part of the business term here, we've got the data dictionary, and in the data dictionary, what Mark has done is he's created this thing called person name, and what person name is the actual piece of data that defines the business term. Yeah. So it's linking. Do you remember there's a slide where we're talking about the business glossary over here and the data over here, and there's that data element in the middle which should join the two together. So that's what we've done in here, is we've joined the two together. And
What level is it joined to?
so the level is to a thing called the data. Actually, let me just jump a slide here then, and I'll show you. So there, yeah. So what he's done, or what Chris has done, he said, okay, here's my business term. I'm going to define all that business term here. There's going to be a generic thing called a data element, yeah, and it's sort of it's a generic data element which is independent of any physical attributes, yeah.
Yeah.
So then what Mark has done, he says, well, actually, this piece of data is really an instance of an attribute as an entity, or a column as part of a table, or a field as part of a file or a report. Yeah. So the idea is to isolate and separate this to provide. So if say for example, the column and the table changes, we don't have to go back and change the mapping because we've simplified the mapping here.
Data element mapped to more than one attribute or column.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So these are the types of examples in there. Yeah. And the other reason that we've got this data element introduced is that then is party to any data flow studies that you might want to do as part of your systems analysis.
When I say more than one column, I mean in conjunction. Yeah. So given that someone's implemented it on a table, say as a name with a type person, can you do that?
So it's a pair of columns, not just...
Yeah, a pair of columns. That's what I was looking for. Yeah, thanks.
But that would require a rule, wouldn't it?
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
But you're not allocating to a rule, you're just allocating to the fields.
You're relating them.
There's nothing to stop you from mapping it to multiple columns.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
As
having
a pair. Yeah.
as a pair.
So you
Yeah.
need both of them.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
need both of them. You need to say...
Don't hold it as a pair.
But
But hold it as a pair. It's a connection to the data.
just A.
To the column. As opposed to these two columns with this rule.
Yeah.
So if we were mapping to a logical model, which is the normal, yeah?
But what we do is we also have lineage in here, so I don't know if you're going to talk about lineage.
Yeah.
So we can do a lineage mapping.
And that would map to more than one
Yes.
column.
Yeah. Yeah.
Correct.
Yeah.
And you'll see some more stuff this afternoon around Octopi, which takes that a step further. But,
Good, because that was the next question.
yeah. So how we get that level of detail into the product, something you'll see in Octopi.
Yeah, so just to say that again. So the data element is a sort of generic, physical, independent piece of data, yeah, which is used to unify the data to multiple types of physical things. So what we then do is we can say, okay, here's the business glossary, and that term happens to map to this particular piece of data, and that's why we use the business term to data element mapping in there. And that's what Chris has done as part of his demonstration in there. And as I say, when I look in there, I should see in there as part of the data dictionary, it's mapped to a thing called person name. Yep. So what that then means again is, let me just see on here. Yep. So that does mean that we can actually do what's called a little bit of an impact analysis within there. Now, remember what I was saying is Mark in the background has been doing, so that's your data element. Yep, that's your data element. Mark in the background, who's the data custodian, he's been mapping person name. Well, that maps to an attribute as part of a table, and it maps to a field as part of a form. Yep. So that's your data element, and that data element is mapped to the business term there, my person name with the incorrect spelling in there. Yep. So it's showing you in there, that's what the mapping has been created in there as a sort of data impact in there. Okay, just going back here then. So Chris has done his updates, he's defined the term, he's mapped it to the underlying data elements. You can go back to his work items in here. It was under review for his, and I've corrected the name in there for the business term. And now he can go along and say, okay, it's actually been approved. And now once it gets approved, because the parameter has been set, it actually has disappeared from his dashboard because it's approved, and we're not showing approved list of items. Otherwise, you'd see thousands of approved business terms in there. Yeah. So he's done that. He can do exactly the same with the issue in there, and go back into there and say, right, okay, here's my issue, missing person name definition. Yep, resolved. And so in the same way, I could have gone in and shown you where we've got Mark, who is the data custodian, going in and looking at managing the data and mapping the data element to the underlying databases and so on. So I'm just going to do that just for a minute, and then are we still okay for time, Simon? Or
You're fine. You keep going.
I can keep on going. Fine. Okay. Yeah, so there we are. So what we're going to do is, as I say, Mark is the one who's responsible for the data and the mappings. And so when we do that and we go and take a look at his, let's log out. And log back in as Mark. So again, for Mark, let's go and take a look at the data dictionary, because that's what he's responsible for looking after. And you can see in here we've got some data models, and part of the integration here is that you can actually import data models which have been generated or produced by Erwin Data Modeler. And that's what we've done here, is we've imported those in. And specifically, we've got this one here called RSPC. And in here, we've got the entities, yeah, and here's the person entity, and here's the person name, and in there that shows, yeah, the actual attribute, as it were, yeah. And because we've got in here, if I can click on that, yeah, let's click on that. And if I look in the data dictionary, it's also showing me backwards, which is saying, well, this is actually an instance of the person name, which is the data element. Yep. And then from the data element, I can trace myself back to the business glossary term that we've got within there. And if I go in and take a look at the data elements, yep, and I've got, how many have I got here? I can see all those, and there should be person name. And so in here, you can see that we've got the data element called person name. Yeah, it's a candidate. and it's relating to applicant name, person name. These are the fields and the fields and the columns that I've mapped it to, or rather Mark has mapped it to in there. And if we look in here for this, and again we can see the same thing. We've got the data, we've got the business glossary mapped to the business term. We've got the business term mapped to the data element, mapped to one of the person name data elements in there. And that's what basically Mark has been going in and doing in there, is taking a look at the data elements and mapping those back to the physical data that we've got over here. So for example, applicant name or person name and what have you. That's what Mark has actually been doing.
Can I just ask a question on the allocation of the data element? Is the idea eventually to be able to push it from, say, data modeler with the data element allocated to these fields, so that you can load it up, already connected, at least at the data element level, because there's an awful lot of connections.
Yeah. So I think that
would be linked at metadata level, shouldn't it? Yeah.
Or should it be part of the active DJ stuff?
Yeah.
Because that would be nice to be able to do it as a one-off, or connected up in a.
Martin, the issue. Sorry.
Yeah, I was thinking.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
We'll take a look at that. Yeah, you should. I don't see any reason why you couldn't create the data elements inside DM and use UDPs and then just transfer it across. Well, not to look at it.
Yeah, because then you can load it up as a one-off, can't you? It's all of type first name or whatever.
Yeah. So we'll take a look at that.
Sure.
For example, on these examples, you might say, well, first name is a type of person's name. Some really relationship between the two, or not at this stage.
For the data elements.
You could have first name, last name, middle name, person name, contact name, and they're all names. So these elements are all the same type. Is there any sort of linking?
The data elements are completely flat. Right. The only structure that you get is where you've got, say, a column which is part of a table, and that's the only structure that you have got. Having said that, there is now completely out of this is on the business term side, you can have relationships which do show that, which says name, and these are the different types of names that they could be, or another example, But the only danger there is that you want to be careful of not reproducing some sort of table structure. So, for example, you could have a business term which says address, and then first line address, second line address, county, and aren't you reproducing some sort of data structure in there?
Well, there you're putting the cart before the horse, because the database is not leading this. Data governance is leading this. The UK address consists of these things. We have a structure.
You could do it that way. You could do it that way.
The database has to follow. What we need here is a way of expressing that.
So you can do that as part of the business terms, where you can actually link the business terms to one another.
It's not quite the same as saying a UK address is made up of 5 parts.
Correct. Yeah.
I'll just ask one. Scott, on that screen there, you had the data element was still a candidate, but Chris had linked the business term to that data element and had marked his thing as resolved. So if that candidate was then rejected rather than approved, does that then unresolve Chris's item, or does his sit there thinking he's complete?
It doesn't do anything automatic now, so there's potential mismatch there. You have to report on any of those anomalies, I guess.
Sorry, just going back to the question that you had there in terms of the relationships. This is just an example here where you can take one business term. Now in here, what we've done here is, well, there's a party, and that party comprises company or person. So that's embedded in there. So you're showing some sort of structure being built in there. So that's one way of doing it. Or you can say, well, there's also relationships between a party and location and credit. Yeah, so it can be either shown like that or they can be shown as a sort of structure in there, but this one's showing both at the same time. Yeah. Okay, so that's what we've done here, is we've gone through the flow in there. And I say the idea really was to show the fact that based on the different roles that people are doing, they've got different activities and different views and different menu structure or menus that are available to them as to the capabilities that they can actually perform. And so, you know, the idea behind the introduction that I was making here and the demonstration was really that, you know, if we've got some sort of strong data governance in place, we can make sure that the people that are interested in the information that we've got, the data that we've got, they can have the confidence to find the data they need. They can go into the business terms, look at the business terms, their mappings to the data in there, understand its meaning from the descriptions and all the other fields that we've got in there. Provided that people have been maintaining and building it, yeah, we should be confident that it's right, and use it to help us as part of any projects that we want, so we can manage the risk, the value, and achieve value and cost, make better, faster decisions in there. And here are some of the examples where, you know, we've shown, yeah, we can achieve regulatory compliance, develop new products, provide a better customer service, and improve the way that the business itself is running.